Sometimes Christmas doesn't begin with presents under a tree. Sometimes it starts with forgotten faces behind a window, waiting for someone to remember they exist. December 24th, 1967. Dean Martin was adjusting his bow tie for the biggest Christmas party in Hollywood when the phone rang. Sammy Davis Jr. was putting on his cufflinks for 3 different celebrity celebrations. In 2 hours, they would be the kings of Beverly Hills, surrounded by champagne and laughter. But something was about to change everything. Something neither of them saw coming. Something that would turn the coolest men in show business into 2 people crying in a parking lot, making the hardest decision of their lives. But what Dean didn't know was that this moment had been haunting him for days, ever since the conversation that planted a seed of doubt in his mind. December 19th, 1967. Dean was having lunch at Musso and Frank when he overheard 2 women talking quietly at the next table. "I went to see my mother at Sunset Manor yesterday," one said. "I don't think I can go back." "Why not?" "It's too depressing, all those people just sitting there waiting for visitors who never come. Some haven't had a visitor since Thanksgiving." The woman's voice dropped lower. "The staff told me that last Christmas only 3 families showed up. 3 families for 84 people. Dean tried not to listen, but the words stuck in his mind like thorns. That night he couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about his own father, who had died young, about growing up without much money but always having family around during holidays, about the difference between being poor and being alone. For 5 days, Dean carried that conversation with him, but he told himself he was being dramatic. There were probably programs, volunteers, people whose job it was to handle these things. But on December 24th, as he prepared for a night of celebration, something inside him snapped. Dean wasn't sure what he was planning to do when he drove to Sunset Manor that evening. Maybe just look, maybe drop off some money for decorations. 5 minutes and then he'd head to the party. But when Dean walked through the front doors, what he saw stopped him cold. The lobby was dimly lit, decorated with tired strands of garland that looked like they'd been hanging since 1945. A small artificial tree sat unlit in the corner, with no presents underneath. "Can I help you?" asked the receptionist, a tired-looking woman. "I'm Dean Martin. I wanted to see about Christmas, for the residents." The woman's eyes widened. "Mr. Martin, what brings you here?" "I heard that not many people visit during holidays." The receptionist glanced around, then leaned forward. "Mr. Martin, we have 84 residents. In the past month, maybe 20 total visitors. Most of our people, they don't have anyone left." "What about Christmas Day?" "Last year, 3 families showed up. 3. Dean felt something cold settle in his chest, but he still wasn't sure what he could do about it. He wasn't a social worker. He was an entertainer. "Can I see them?" The receptionist hesitated. "They're having evening meal now, but I suppose—" She led Dean down a hallway that smelled like disinfectant and sadness. At the end was a large room with windows facing the parking lot. Through those windows, Dean Martin saw something that broke him. 37 elderly people sitting in wheelchairs and chairs, some staring at their hands, some staring at nothing, all in complete silence. No Christmas decorations, no tree, no sign that Christmas was 12 hours away. "They're waiting," the receptionist said quietly. "For what?" "For someone to visit. Some have been sitting there since morning hoping someone would come." Dean watched an elderly man check his watch, then look toward the door. Hope and disappointment crossed his face in seconds. That's when Dean Martin pulled out his phone. But he hesitated. What was he calling for? What was he asking Sammy to do? Leave the biggest parties of the year to what? But then he looked at the elderly people again. And he thought about his father, and he thought about being alone. His hands shaking, Dean dialed Sammy's number. "Sam, you need to get down here, now." "Dean, what's wrong? I'm supposed to be—" "Sunset Manor Nursing Home, Pico Boulevard. Just come." "Dean, what's going on?" "I can't explain it over the phone, but Sam, bring your heart." 20 minutes later, Sammy Davis Jr. arrived still in his tuxedo, confused and worried. "Dean, what the hell?" "Just look," Dean said, pointing through the window. Sammy looked, and for a long moment, neither man spoke. "How many?" Sammy asked finally. 37 in this room, 84 total. Visitors today? None." Sammy watched a woman in a wheelchair adjust a blanket with shaking hands. She looked toward the window, saw 2 men in tuxedos staring at her, and quickly looked away. "Dean," Sammy said quietly, "we can't just stand here looking at them like they're in a zoo." "I know. But we also can't just walk away." "I know." They stood in silence for another minute. Inside, the elderly residents continued their quiet waiting. Outside, two of the most famous entertainers in America struggled with a choice they'd never faced before. "What are our options?" Sammy asked. "I don't know. Drop off money? Call someone? There's got to be programs." "Dean, it's Christmas Eve. Nobody's running programs tonight." "So what do we do?" Sammy was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was different, smaller. What if we just went inside? Talked to them?" "For how long?" "I don't know. An hour? 2 hours?" Dean looked at his watch. 7:30 p.m. The first Christmas party started at 8. The biggest one started at 9. "What about the parties? What about them?" "Sam, these are career opportunities, networking. The whole industry will be there. And we'll be here." Another silence, longer this time. "Dean, can I ask you something? When you die, what do you want people to remember? That you went to every party, or that you stayed when someone needed you?" Dean looked through the window again. The elderly man was checking his watch again, still hoping. "But we don't know anything about taking care of old people. We know about being human. Maybe that's enough. What if we mess it up? What if we make things worse? What if we make things better?" Dean felt something shift inside him. Not a dramatic moment, just a quiet certainty. "You know what, Sam? I think we're canceling Christmas." "Yeah, I think we are." But saying it and doing it were different things. Neither of them had ever organized anything like this. They were entertainers, not social workers. "Should we call Frank?" Sammy asked. "You think he'd come?" "Are you kidding? Frank's been looking for a reason to skip those parties for years." They started making calls. Frank Sinatra, who arrived 30 minutes later with decorations from his own house. Joey Bishop, who brought enough food for an army. Peter Lawford, who showed up with a Christmas tree. But the most important calls went to every musician they knew in Los Angeles. "Bring your instruments, bring your voices, bring everything you've got." By 9 p.m., something was happening at Sunset Manor. Christmas lights were being strung, the tree was being decorated, food was being prepared, and 37 elderly residents were no longer sitting in silence. Dean Martin found himself next to a 92-year-old woman named Rose Kowalski, who hadn't spoken to anyone in weeks. "Rose," Dean said, reading her name tag. "That's a beautiful name." Rose looked up at him with eyes that had seen 92 years of life. "Are you real?" she whispered. "I'm real, and you're real, and it's Christmas Eve." "I thought everyone had forgotten." "Nobody's forgotten, Rose. We just got a little lost finding you." Across the room, Sammy Davis Jr. was teaching card games to an elderly man named Walter, who kept winning hand after hand. "You're good at this," Sammy said. "I used to play jazz clubs in the 30s, Walter replied. "Card games between sets. Different kind of performing. Same audience, though, people who need something to believe in." As midnight approached, Dean looked at Sammy across the room. They nodded to each other. They had planned this moment. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dean announced, "we'd like to sing you something." And at midnight on Christmas Day, in a nursing home recreation room, Dean Martin and Sammy Davis Jr. sang Silent Night without instruments. By the second verse, Rose Kowalski was singing along in a voice that hadn't been heard in months. By the third verse, everyone was singing. When the song ended, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. The celebration lasted until dawn. Real food, real decorations, real presents bought from 24-hour stores, real conversation with people who hadn't been listened to in years, real Christmas for people who thought the world had forgotten them. When it was over, Dean and Sammy sat in the parking lot in their cars, still in their wrinkled tuxedos. "You know what?" Dean said through his window. "What?" "That was the best Christmas I've ever had." "Me too." "You think we did the right thing?" "Look," Sammy said, pointing back at the building. Through the windows, they could see residents still talking to each other, still smiling, still remembering what it felt like to matter. "Yeah," Dean said. "I think we did." But the story didn't end with one perfect night. Because sometimes, when you choose to be present for people who need you, it changes more than just one evening. Dean and Sammy never missed another Christmas at Sunset Manor. For 15 years until both men died, they spent December 25th with people who had become family. Rose Kowalski lived until 1975. At her funeral, Dean Martin gave the eulogy to a church packed with entertainers who had come to know her as a friend. Walter lived until 1973. At his funeral, Sammy Davis Jr. played a recording of a jazz standard Walter had taught him. He said nobody would remember these songs, Sammy told the mourners. He was wrong. What started as one night of canceled Christmas plans became a movement. Other nursing homes in Los Angeles reported increased visitation. Other celebrities started their own traditions of spending holidays with forgotten people. The entertainment industry learned something that Dean and Sammy discovered, that Christmas Eve, the best audience is one that genuinely needs you to show up. Today, there's a plaque in the lobby of Sunset Manor that reads, "In memory of Dean Martin and Sammy Davis Jr., who taught us that Christmas isn't about the presents under the tree, it's about being present for people who need you." But the real memorial isn't a plaque. It's that every December 24th, Sunset Manor is still filled with people who choose to cancel their own plans to make sure nobody spends Christmas forgotten. That's the story of the night Dean Martin and Sammy Davis Jr. learned that sometimes the greatest gift you can give is showing up. For people who need you to see them, who need you to remember they exist, who need you to prove that forgotten doesn't mean gone. But there's something else about that night that few people know. Something that reveals just how much those few hours changed Dean and Sammy themselves. 3 weeks later, Dean got a call from his housekeeper. "Mr. Dean, there's a lady here. She says her name is Dorothy Kowalski." Dean didn't recognize the name, but something sounded familiar. When he came to the door, he saw a woman in her 60s holding a small wrapped box. "Mr. Martin, I'm Rose's daughter, from Sunset Manor." The memory hit him immediately. Rose, the 92-year-old woman who had sung Silent Night with them. "Dorothy, please, come in. How is your mother?" Dorothy's eyes filled with tears. "She died last week, peacefully." Dean felt something heavy settle in his chest. "I'm so sorry." "Mr. Martin, I came to give you this." She handed him the box. "And to tell you something." Inside was a faded photograph of a young woman in a wedding dress. On the back, "For Dean Martin, who gave me back my voice, Rose." "My mother hadn't spoken more than a few words in almost a year before that Christmas Eve," Dorothy said. "The doctor said it was depression. She felt invisible, like she didn't matter." Dean studied the photograph, Rose as a young bride full of hope. But after that night, she was different. She started talking again. She made friends. "Mr. Martin, you gave her back the last 6 months of her life." "Dorothy, all we did was show up." "Sometimes that's everything." After Dorothy left, Dean sat holding the photograph. He thought about Rose's voice joining theirs, about how a woman who felt invisible had found her voice again. He called Sammy. "Sam, do you ever think about that night?" "Every day. Why?" "Rose died." Silence. Then, "I'll be right over." An hour later, they were sitting in Dean's living room, two of the biggest stars in entertainment, quietly grieving for a 92-year-old woman most people would never have noticed. "You know what kills me?" Sammy said finally. "What?" "How close we came to not going. If you hadn't made that call, she would have spent Christmas alone. They all would have." Dean looked at the photograph again. "Sam, I've been thinking about all those Christmas parties we've been to, the ones we thought were so important." "Yeah?" "I can't remember a single conversation from any of them, not one person I met." "But you remember every person we met that night, every single one." That conversation led to something neither had planned. They started visiting Sunset Manor regularly, not as celebrities doing charity, but as people who had found something they didn't know they were looking for. Dean would sit with residents and listen to their stories. Stories about wars, families, dreams, stories no one else had time to hear. Sammy would play card games and teach magic tricks. He'd listen to Walter talk about jazz clubs of the 30s, about musicians forgotten by history but alive in Walter's memory. "These people are libraries," Sammy told Dean one day, "living libraries of everything we're about to lose." Word spread quietly through Hollywood. Other entertainers started visiting, not for publicity, but because they'd heard something in Dean and Sammy's voices. Frank Sinatra became a regular. Joey Bishop started a comedy writing class. Peter Lawford began documenting residents' stories. By the next Christmas, Sunset Manor had become something unprecedented, a place where genuine connection mattered more than career advancement. Years later, when interviewers asked about their greatest accomplishments, neither man mentioned movies or records. They talked about Christmas Eve, 1967. "I spent 40 years trying to be famous," Dean said, "but I spent the best years trying to be present. There's a difference." When Dean Martin died in 1995, his funeral was attended by Hollywood royalty. But in the front row sat Sunset Manor residents. They were recipients of his presence. Because that's what Dean and Sammy learned at midnight on Christmas Day. That the greatest gift isn't something that fits under a tree. It's being someone who watches over people when others look away. Someone who sees them when invisible. Someone who remembers them when forgotten. Sometimes that gift changes everyone involved. In the end, we all need someone to watch over us. We all need someone to prove we matter. We all need show.